There's an old saying, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And for fearful avoidant attachment styles specifically, this is often the case. In fact, fearful avoidant attachment styles often get unfairly punished in childhood because they are less so being punished for something they did wrong and more so experiencing the wrath of anger being taken out on them due to other problems that often have very little to do with just them. And in today's video, we're going to unpack a very common experience for the fearful avoidant attachment style, which is unfair or unjust punishment in childhood, and why this takes place and what you can do to heal. Because believe it or not, if this was your experience as a fearful avoidant, it is quite common that you don't even realize how much this is impacting you in your adult life, preventing you from bonding closely in relationships, feeling safe to let your guard down, and moving away from a consistently hypervigilant state. My hope for you in this video today is that by the end of it, you walk away with some deep insight and certainty as to why you behave some of the ways that you do, especially around authority figures, around anybody you put on a pedestal, why you may feel this chronic need to be hypervigilant and over-explain yourself at times, and most importantly, what you can do to set this pattern to rest once and for all. Now, if you're newer to this channel and you're not sure about what a fearful avoidant attachment style is, the fearful avoidant is the person who tends to swing hot and cold in relationships. They sort of have this come get close to me, wait, stay back dynamic going on at all times. They often flip-flop between wanting to invest and being scared to really let their guard down and let people in. And fearful avoidants basically grow up in a childhood that's more marked by chaos and stress than other attachment styles. And this can be really perpetual, chronic, small t trauma that's a huge part of the backdrop of their childhood. Or this can be big T trauma that essentially takes place in less frequent of a basis, but still has a huge impact on the way a child is affected. Now, not all fearful avoidants go through exactly what we're going to dive into here with this unjust and kind of chronic punishment, but this is a very common experience. And I'm going to start by just depicting this experience with one of my clients who we'll call D, because that was the letter of his first name. And D grew up in a childhood where his father left when he was young and he had a single mother. But about the age of 7 years old, his mother remarried and got into a relationship with somebody who was basically very, very strict, very controlling, and honestly had pretty extreme anger issues. Now, D found himself all of a sudden living with this other man who was playing this role as his stepfather and being this essentially father figure in his life and in his childhood. And what he reported is that he would get screamed at and sometimes even severely punished by very small things. He shared with me in client sessions that he would come in sometimes from school at the end of the day and his father may be taking a nap, or his stepfather may be taking a nap, and he would come in and laugh with his other sibling, and the stepfather would come running out of the room, scream at him, spank him, and go back into the room again. So D experienced not only feeling like the punishment didn't fit the crime, but he experienced getting into a lot of trouble for things like laughing, for being a child. And this was the common theme on pretty much a daily basis of his childhood. He found that his stepfather would take his anger out on him all the time, would be extremely angry if he didn't finish all the food on his plate. And basically, he would go through dynamics over and over again, feeling like he never really knew how to predict what he was going to get in trouble for and how he could prevent it, because there was no common thread. Okay. It wasn't like he was doing things that the boundaries of the family had discussed and defined as wrong, and that those things had been clarified and communicated to D. No, it was all these random things all the time that he was getting in so much trouble for. And so because of this, D grew up to have what we call this huge I am bad core wound. Now, what do I mean by the I am bad core wound? Well, what I mean is that when a person grows up to feel like they are bad for existing and they can never predict what behaviors, because there's been no communication about these things, there's no common thread like, hey, if you sneak out of the house, that's going to cause you to be in trouble. So don't sneak out of the house or you will have consequences. When there's no established boundaries, there's no established communication, but instead you're finding yourself being screamed at or punished for laughing or for not finishing all the food on your plate or for, having too much fun in the backyard and not knowing that you have a specific bedtime. When you're experiencing this, because it feels like it's about who you are, it is very common for children growing up in the fearful avoidant household that creates that fearful avoidant attachment style to constantly believe that they are bad at a deep subconscious level. Now, a lot of people consciously, when they hear this, will say, well, Thais, I don't feel like I am bad. I know that I'm a good person. I know that I'm doing my best. However, your conscious mind can understand that, but if you have these following symptoms, you may come to realize, actually, I do carry this core belief about myself, and it may be time to let it go. So, very common symptoms of the I am bad core wound are things like over explaining yourself all the time. Number two, living in the future and constantly assuming what people will think of you or perceive of you, and then on an ongoing basis, trying to get ahead of it. Number three, feeling like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. Number four, fearing that you're going to be seen as the bad person if somebody misunderstands you. Our next one is finding the need to constantly try to control people's perceptions of you. And this can be something that takes a lot of emotional energy to micromanage. And you may even find that you put a lot of pressure on yourself to be a perfectionist, or that you assume punishment for really small things. Last but not least, you may find if you have an I am bad core wound that you struggle with authority and struggle to trust authority as a whole. In particular, if you derived these core wounds from feeling like I am bad in childhood. So, what happens to a person in their adult life when they go through this experience? Well, if you grow up in a household where you are constantly being punished or having anger taken out on you as a child because of challenges that your parents or caregivers are going through, and some of these common challenges, by the way, include things like a parent struggling with substance issues or alcohol, a parent having way too much stress on their plate, parents going through a really tumultuous divorce and not knowing how to emotionally regulate or manage their own anger or impulses. If you have any of these types of situations, or somebody who literally is struggling with their own mental health as a parent or both parents, if you're seeing these types of contexts for things, then it's pretty likely that when anger is taken out on you as a child, we internalize that and sponge that up as children and then project the assumption onto other people as adults that they will behave and treat us in the same way. And I had somebody in our one of our PDS webinars share a wonderful, very insightful, hardworking student share recently how she found herself basically doing this. She found herself constantly trying to control people's perceptions of her. And it was a barrier to her building authentic relationships because rather than being herself and being vulnerable and letting somebody in, she had this ongoing inner dialogue and this guard up about what somebody might think of her or how they may perceive her. And she was constantly trying to explain everything to somebody in advance, never really allowing herself to be present and let somebody in and share her needs and just show up in an authentic way in a relationship. And of course, not only does this prevent us from truly bonding as our authentic selves with others, but on top of that, it causes us to become exhausted by people so much more quickly. So, if this is something that you're experiencing, please let me know in the chat and what the context was. I think it'll be so interesting to see, in the comments down below, what different individuals' contexts were for this. But now let's talk about what you can actually do. Well, number one, we actually have to get comfortable with being okay in the uncertainty of not knowing what somebody thinks of us. It can feel Terrifying if you grew up like this to not explain yourself to somebody the moment you think they may misunderstand you. Now, of course, it's important to communicate when we do have misunderstandings. But if we find ourselves in a situation where nobody seems upset, nobody seems triggered, it doesn't seem like there's any kind of issue between ourselves and somebody else, and yet we still feel the need to micromanage their perception of us with every little detail intact and over explain everything, you're actually recycling this experience. In other words, you are basically becoming the person who conditioned you to be this way to yourself. You are sitting there oftentimes thinking, this person thinks that you're bad. This person doesn't understand where you're coming from. This person thinks that you're going to do everything wrong or mess things up or that you don't care. And you're kind of being that controlling voice of perhaps the parent that would guilt and shame you for things all the time as a child, or perhaps that was both parents in your household. So we go back to D's father or stepfather really would constantly assume the worst of him and then punish him accordingly. And you may find that you're actually reenacting that same pattern back in the relationship to yourself, thinking that somebody assumes the worst of you, telling yourself that, and then punishing yourself for it or trying to cope with it by over explaining everything. And that's really allowing that wound to stay alive. So we have to practice something called exposure work. Exposure work helps us slowly but surely in very small increments practice not over explaining ourselves and controlling everybody's perceptions of us, sitting in that degree of discomfort and letting ourselves know everything will be okay. If this person actually has a problem or an issue, I trust myself to be able to communicate through it or work through it with them. But I'm going to instead practice reconditioning that pattern of sitting in that uncertainty, sitting in that not knowing, sitting in that space of realizing that not everybody's always going to assume and think the worst of me. And that's a very important first step. The second major step that we can work on here is we can practice counteracting this idea that I am bad with a cognitive reframe and checking in to see how this person actually, in fact, sees our innocence. See, the opposite of the core wound, I am bad, is not I am good. It is I am innocent. It's this concept or idea that this person understands that I'm doing my best. I'm not perfect, but I'm innocent. I'm not here doing negative things on purpose or trying to harm somebody or trying to take advantage of somebody. But if you had a parent or parents or caregivers growing up who constantly seem to assume the worst of you will literally assume that everybody else is doing that 24/7 with or for you as well. And your goal is to recondition that by realizing, guess what? People do see my innocence. People do see that I'm doing the best that I can. People are not assuming the worst of me all the time. And when we can cognitively reframe that, as we're practicing that exposure work of sitting in the discomfort of not explaining ourselves, this will help us climb out of this old, outdated childhood pattern. If you're interested in helping make a huge impact on other people's lives while also building financial freedom, I'm offering an early bird 50% discount on our integrated attachment theory relationship certification program that will help you become a certified integrated attachment theory relationship coach and build your own thriving practice by the end of 12 weeks. This 12-week on-demand program will help you kickstart your new career by teaching you revolutionary tools and strategies that help clients transform their lives and relationships. Build your own coaching practice and set yourself up for a waitlist of clients and financial success. Even if you have no coaching experience, this program will give you very in-depth tools, resources, and confidence to get started in a matter of weeks. And you can learn more information by clicking the link down below. And if you find yourself just chronically putting so much pressure and stress on yourself, not even just to be perfect, for example, in the workplace, but actually in all of your relationships will be the major place this shows up. God forbid you ever say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing or accidentally hurt somebody. It's like you'll put all of this pressure on yourself and feel all of this grief and shame and guilt in a really extreme way, rather than just honoring that you're a human being and sometimes you're going to make mistakes. And what actually matters is how you then approach those mistakes after the fact. The fact that you go and you actually pick yourself back up and have a conversation and take accountability and work through it. And when you trust yourself to do that and you recondition this idea that you're caring about yourself all the time, that's where you'll take your freedom back. That's where relationships won't feel so exhausting, won't burn you out. And you can work through all of this pressure and perfection and expectation you put on yourselves as well. So I'll put a link to that course fully for free down below so you can check that out. And that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here. Please like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. And I can't wait to see you in the next one.